Awesome. Thanks, Jim. I appreciate you inviting me to join you all tonight. So those of you I haven't met yet, my name is Chris Bortlik. I'm one of the architects at the Microsoft Technology Center in Burlington, Mass. So we're going to spend the next, I guess, 45 minutes, hour or so, talking a bit around Project Cortex. And as Deb mentioned, what was announced last week at Ignite, SharePoint Syntax, which is the first application as part of Project Cortex. So as we jump into things, certainly I know it's a small enough group here, so feel free to unmute yourself, raise your hand, put something in chat, whatever you're all most comfortable with. I noticed that no one has video on but me, so if you do feel comfortable and want to turn your video on, that certainly helps me as a speaker to know that you're there and that I haven't put anyone to sleep. But don't feel that you have to do it if you don't feel comfortable doing so. And then certainly I think we've all been doing enough Teams and other online meetings that you all know kind of good etiquette around being on mute and using a headset and all that. So just wanted to kind of put out some of the best practices we've learned doing 6 months worth of remote engagements at the MTC. Always like to kind of start out with that. So 2020, we were talking about this a little bit at the start. I think Laura was mentioning it's been an interesting year for all of us, Microsoft being part of it. And when we first announced Project Cortex in 2019, back at Ignite 2019, by this time when we were getting ready to ship, I think we thought the world would be a little bit different. That was about 4 or 5 months before COVID kind of took off here in the United States. So really, as we think about 2020 and what's going on, we've really been reflecting back on Microsoft's mission, which, as folks know, over the last few years under Satya's leadership, has really been focused around looking to empower every person and organization on the planet to achieve more. And as we think about bringing Project Cortex to market, SharePoint Syntax being the first part of Project Cortex, actually becoming generally available today, is the first day that SharePoint Syntax is generally available to folks. Really to kind of think about launching a product during the time of COVID. So when you think about Project Cortex and what it is and what we're trying to do, it really starts off focused around content and content services. Those of us who have been on the line, like Jim and Deb and Derek, we've been with SharePoint, in my case at least, for around 20 years. So certainly SharePoint at its core, as you were talking, Jim, at the start, is really at its core one of the strongest kind of enterprise content management platforms that's out there. And certainly as we moved into Office 365, some of the typical challenges we had on premises with size and scale and site collection and content databases have really been able to blow out some of the limits that we had in the past with file size and size of site collections. But now that we have all this content, it's really been focused around user experiences and how do we build really rich and robust user experiences on the platform. Jim, I think you were talking at the start, a lot of the centers around the graph, the Microsoft graph being a really powerful set of endpoints for developers like you to build applications, but also the insights and the telemetry that we glean from the graph to understand relationships between people and content, as well as the security graph that we get to understand anomalous behavior around security and compliance and other things we need to think about. So now that we have the content and we have these experiences, really the focus is how do we get information and how do we get knowledge out of the content that we're storing? As we start to have gigabytes and terabytes of content in Office 365, how do we reason over that content to actually start to derive knowledge out of that, whether it's finding subject matter experts, whether it's finding content, Deb's use case around having a stack of receipts and paper-based forms and things that are coming in through faxes and scanning. How do we actually start to digitize that content and turn that content into knowledge? And actually glean some insights from that and actually look at reinventing business processes once we can actually take that receipt or take that expense report and extract the information that's stored within that document and actually use that to drive workflow and business process for workflow and approval and other things. So really, as you think about Project Cortex in the time of what's going on with COVID, first off, we're really trying to help our customers continue to remain agile. Again, 6 months ago, a lot of customers might not have had, things like Teams and remote work and work from home. Again, I think, Laura, you mentioned really having the opportunity to work from home a bit more than you may have been able to do before. And that's a pattern and a trend that we've seen, but also helping customers to be more resilient. So if and when the next sort of pandemic happens, or even if think about my 4 kids in school, the idea of a snow day has really kind of gone away because schools have learned to be more resilient and say, it's not the same, but this hybrid learning thing is kind of working out okay. And if we have another snow day, maybe we do some distance learning if something happens, or if a child is sick or something like that, to help our students, our companies to be more resilient for the next time something happens, God forbid, to help us all to be a bit more resilient as an overall ecosystem, as an economy, as a world, really. So Project Cortex, as I mentioned, is really focused around helping us to connect people with knowledge and experts and to get insights out of that. So content services, as we know, has really been a core part of Office 365, SharePoint being the content services layer to power things like OneDrive for Business, like Microsoft Teams, really being the content storage engine behind anything based on Office 365 groups, now Microsoft 365 groups, including things like Yammer, and as Deb mentioned, Stream, actually moving some of the recordings from channel meetings and one-to-one meetings to actually be stored inside of SharePoint because of the rich records management capabilities we have, the ability to do retention policies and discovery and tag things with metadata, really building upon that content services set of capabilities we've had. Then being able to drive knowledge discovery, which is really where Project Cortex is focused in, helping us to understand and get expertise and answers. Certainly we're seeing a lot of that with the new Yammer and Yammer communities and the ability to ask a question, designate it as a question, having the ability to mark a question as being answered and which of the answers was the best response, ability to close conversations, pin conversations, to really help us to get that information, but also finding expertise and answers through search, through Microsoft Search, whether it's looking up what an acronym might mean or bringing in a best bet or other things to find the right answer to the question. And then lastly, getting workplace insights and visibility. So again, seeing a lot of trends that we've been sharing with customers based on anonymous telemetry on some of the patterns we're seeing in the workplace as people are working remotely. And some of the things that we're seeing where folks are getting a bit burned out because there's really not that downtime to transition. Most of us are transitioning from walking out of the office into the kitchen, and you're going from being in work to being with your family, your friend, your spouse, your partner, your cat, your dog, whatever's in the house. You don't have that kind of downtime to transition, and really making sure there's that work-life balance and work-life integration, and how we can glean workplace insights to understand who's working with who, but also how much time are we spending on certain activities. So these are some of the trends and kind of the backdrop of things that we're seeing. So as we think about modernizing content services in Microsoft 365, what our customers have been telling us, and certainly what I experienced, so those of you that know me, you know that I've been with Microsoft for around 12 years. My entire focus has been on our productivity platform, including SharePoint and Office 365, and doing a lot with security and compliance in our business process and business applications around Power Automate and Power Apps and Power BI. Before I joined Microsoft 12 years ago, though, I actually spent 14 years as a Microsoft customer, actually managing and working with SharePoint back on premises. Back in the day, Chris McNulty and I were actually peers working at John Hancock. And fun fact, Mark Anderson, who Derek, I know you work with, actually was a consultant working with me on a project. So kind of funny how 20 years later we're all in different roles at different companies and just the relationships that we've built over the years. But the problem has really been pretty consistent over the last 26 years or so I've been in IT and 20 or so years working with SharePoint, right? Is really still having, after all these years, disconnected silos across line of business systems and legacy systems, having challenges with managing and applying metadata in a consistent way, in a consistent taxonomy and information architecture. When we are tagging content, it's often still been very labor intensive and error prone. Because us as humans, we get fatigued, we get tired. So is there an opportunity to leverage computers and artificial intelligence and machine learning to take away some of the monotonous things that are a bit error prone and really, again, help to bring some more consistency to the process? And then lastly, having the ability to drive really strong compliance and records management and retention policies over our content as well. So Microsoft 365, we really think can help with solving some of these challenges. Microsoft 365 being really the umbrella suite that encompasses Office 365, our enterprise mobility and security capabilities, in our Windows capabilities, really to give us really rich ability to understand content, to process the content, and again, really strong content governance, not just for content stored in Office 365, but also the ability to ingest content from other sources as well. And we think there's a lot of benefit through improving governance and control. And it's not just us, it's we commissioned Forrester back in July of 2020. They did a total economic impact of Project Cortex, talking to some early adopters, companies like McDonald and other companies that were in the early adopter program, giving us feedback on Project Cortex. And they've really found in a typical kind of company of, I don't remember the exact size that they built these estimates based off of, but money and savings based on content classification and curation can range from anywhere from 1.2 million to around 3.3 million. Improving discovery, making it easier for people to find content instead of reinventing the wheel and having to keep building that same presentation and document over and over. It could be anywhere from 42 million to 127 million. And then the ability to retire legacy tools and potentially some of the technology debt that's there to support and have services and other folks that have to manage these legacy systems, again, can be around $1 million or so. So again, we see a lot of business value in a solution like this as well. So as folks know, we made the first announcement of the first product under the Project Cortex brand. Microsoft SharePoint Syntax is the first application that we announced last week at Ignite, and again, it became generally available today. So what Project Cortex and what Microsoft SharePoint Syntax is focusing on in the first release is really focused on three key pillars. One is around content understanding. So having the ability for someone that may not be a professional developer like Jim to create no-code artificial intelligence models that can be used to capture expertise and classify content. So a very typical thing is not just an expense report or a receipt, as Deb mentioned, but potentially taking things like a purchase order and having the ability to look at a purchase order and actually map the fields. So whenever we bring a purchase order in, whether it's being uploaded to a SharePoint document library or it's being scanned in with partners like Fujitsu, I actually have a Fujitsu scanner sitting here in my office that we're going to connect into a demo experience where we can actually, again, ingest things that we're scanning, capturing faxes of purchase orders and kind of digitizing these things to be able to promote fields such as a date or the vendor or the total cost as actual metadata as columns in SharePoint to then drive business process. But we realize that not all documents are as well structured as maybe a purchase order. There may be a lot of unstructured documents, documents such as a statement of work or a legal contract, things that really are not well structured. That today we might be doing things like Lewis and building models that typically require, again, a professional developer or a person that has a deep expertise and knowledge in data science. So how do we actually democratize that to make it a bit easier for, again, the average person, the business analyst, the power user to potentially build some of these models and then automate business processes with solutions like Power Automate. And then how do we leverage the tagging of the content and feed that into content compliance, both for security, so labeling content to drive encryption policies and access requirements, as well as governance to deal with things around disposition, records management, file plans, et cetera. So I'm going to kind of pause for a second, see if there's any questions. Does this make sense so far to folks? I see Jim nodding, so that's a good thing. Anyone else have any questions so far or thoughts? No? All right, cool. So as you think about the evolution of content-based artificial intelligence, historically, and again, this goes back to even when I was doing my computer science degree around 25 years ago, and you think about traditional artificial intelligence and kind of black box artificial intelligence, you typically have had to have large training sets, and the human often would review the results at the end of the training, right? You think about we gather large amounts of data, the artificial intelligence might identify some patterns, the AI then applies tags to content, and then an expert goes in and does some QA after the fact, and they review the model. And one of the challenges of that is capturing a large amount of data, and then actually how do we do some training of the model to apply reinforcement, positive reinforcement, and negative reinforcement. Again, the analogy I often use with AI training is I have 4 children, as many of you know, and how do we train our kids, or how do I train my kids, and how do they learn how to do basic things like crawl and then walk and then run? How do they learn positive behavior that we want to reinforce, like maybe doing well in school, compared to negative behavior, where maybe they're hitting their sibling or not listening to you, as an example of a negative behavior that you don't want to reward, but you want to give that feedback to hopefully correct that behavior over time. So modern artificial intelligence, what we see is really evolving into doing more human and machine teaching, where it's kind of human-centric AI, where it's humans and the machines doing some of this training. We're looking at smaller sample sizes, and then we're enabling experts to review the results early in the process. So instead of waiting weeks and months and maybe years to collect a large amount of data, we're involving the humans early in the process so that humans can go in and tag a smaller sample set of documents. They can tag them as positive examples or negative examples. And the AI can go in and encode the human expertise as tagging rules. And then over time, we can start to develop confidence levels and understand, well, how confident are we that we got this right? Again, you see this do us a lot right now, even in like data loss prevention in Office 365, where we're, looking at confidence levels of how confident are we that we found a credit card number or a social security number. And a lot of times it's not just based on a regular expression, it's based on proximity, finding other things that look like a credit card number, such as the existence of Amex or Visa or MasterCard, or an expiration date or something else that looks like it might give us a higher level of confidence based on the close proximity of other things or the volume of the content that we're finding. So we know that it's not a false positive. So again, our view around artificial intelligence, and Brad Smith, who's been our president and chief legal officer, has really talked about artificial intelligence and his book kind of Tools and Weapons. And if you haven't listened to that or read that, it's a really great read about kind of what we view as kind of ethical AI. And it's really, how do we have AI, again, that's not necessarily replacing humans, certainly trying to replace monotonous tasks that we can automate, but having humans and AI working together. And making sure that as we think about things on this continuum, certainly there is a role for humans still to go through and do some manual tagging and classifying of content, whether it's with terms through a term set or leveraging content types or folder-based metadata defaults. Over time, getting more and more into leveraging object detection. So Jim, you mentioned a good example of a project your company is working on, right? Where you're doing things with certain fish and parasites and other things where we're trying to detect objects. But also, can we do that with things like scanning in documents and business cards? Can we do video, doing speech to text, like you're seeing in Teams and Stream? Can we do OCR maybe on a business card or a scan and take that image and bring it in and convert it to text? Forms processing, I kind of showed you the sample kind of model, and we'll drill in a bit more into that in a little bit. But again, taking those very well-structured documents, like a purchase order, but even looking at the unstructured documents, again, contracts, resumes, legal documents, statement of works. Again, I know a few of you are consultants. You think about the variability in the SOWs that you might write. Oftentimes, it might be on your paper, it might be on the customer's paper. So how do we go through and actually mine that? A real good example of this is I was working with a company that sells leases for towers. That they rent out their towers to some of the telcos, and their different contracts and agreements are in all different formats. And the challenge they had is they wanted to mine the documents to see if they could find the contract value, find out what the payment terms are on the contract, find out, was it a 1-year lease or a 5-year lease or a 10-year lease? And they want to drive business process and workflow off of that. And they have a lot of challenges because the documents are in different formats and potentially different languages as well. So the beauty of this is that Project Cortex, SharePoint Syntax are really being built on top of the back of a lot of the things we've been building in Azure over the last few years. You think about a lot of the platform services, you think about what we did with the Power Platform with things like AI Builder, and now Project Cortex can build on top of that. Plus leverage some new things that we're doing with Microsoft Research and actually productize some of this into a product offering as well. So we're going to talk through a lot of these examples, but again, SharePoint Syntax is really focused initially around these file formats and based on content understanding. And you're going to find us walk through kind of 2 examples. One, again, is that example around document understanding. You're going to see there's a new site template that we've created called a content center. And really the idea with the content center is you go ahead and you'll build and train a model. You can use a variety of different unstructured file formats. Typically, you're training it on anywhere from 5 to 10 documents. A PDF document, Office documents, positive and negative examples. And the nice thing is that once we do that, when we build these trainable classifiers and extractors, we can then reuse that model across multiple libraries, across Office 365, multiple document libraries that might exist across multiple site collections. Compare that with form processing, where typically it's the end user leveraging the integrated AI Builder capabilities, very similar to how you integrate with Power Automate today to create a workflow in a document library. And then they'll actually go ahead and map the fields. And that model is, in this case, really restricted to a single document library. So it's a case where we want to say, yeah, we have a document library that's focused on purchase orders for this client or this project. And we're going to build a model that's very specific to this document library that might be connected to a specific team or a specific business process. And in this case, again, we're going to start with usually 5 to 10 different documents, and we're going to train it and really focus on PDF and image file formats, anywhere from 50 meg to around 500 pages worth of content. And again, that content could be things that are already digital, or it could be things that we're bringing in and scanning in through a partner solution like a Fujitsu scanner as an example. So document libraries, those of you that have been with SharePoint for a long time really know, folks know is that really the core of content services in Microsoft 365, and we're really proud of the growth that's happened over the years around not just having really large files. I forget what it's even up to now. Is it like 25 gig files or something like that, and 1 terabyte site collections, really crazy large files and site collections, but also supporting over 300 different file types with viewers in the browser. Things like CAD drawings and DICOM images, things that can now be made visible directly through the web browser, not just Office documents with the Office Online viewers. How SharePoint is really powering the backend for things like Teams and Teams document libraries, which really a team is built on a group and a group is built on a SharePoint site. OneDrive is built on that as well. So really, really proud of the work that's been done by the team around scaling SharePoint, the integration with OneDrive to have a really rich sync client for offline access. And really the work that's been done to build on top of the infrastructure that's been there, focused around metadata and version history and policy. And certainly the things we've taken for granted forever around check-in, check-out, approval, workflows, and really modern document sets as well. We've also made a lot of investments in metadata and the managed metadata service, which if you've been with SharePoint for a while, you'll know that SharePoint Online really had not invested a lot in the managed metadata service. It looked very similar to SharePoint 2010, 2013, dare I say, kind of farms even in the admin center in SharePoint Online. That's changed over the last few months. And we're really looking at promoting metadata and tagging to not just be a SharePoint construct, but to be a Microsoft 365 level construct as well. How does that then integrate with Microsoft Search? So again, elevating search to not just be a siloed application where SharePoint had its search, Outlook and Exchange had its search, Yammer had its search, Teams had its search, Windows had its search, Office had its search, right? All these different kind of search silos to now have Microsoft Search being one consistent search engine and search platform that cuts across all content across Microsoft 365, whether it's files in SharePoint, conversations in Teams, messages inside of Outlook, getting that all onto a consistent index, and then leveraging the Microsoft Graph and content connectors to bring in content from third-party systems like ServiceNow or Documentum or file servers or Salesforce or a whole bunch of other applications. A really consistent tagging experience for both humans to tag content, but also the ability to do some auto tagging and contextual content tagging and suggestions. And then lastly, really using these improved services to have a unified taxonomy service and making it easier to publish and discover the tags and really have an enterprise scale content service addressing some of the challenges historically around the content type syndication, thinking about modern ways that we're doing information architecture with hub sites and related sites and be able to scope content types and metadata at a particular hub site and then push that down to the member sites, because we're no longer really looking at having subsites and really making sure we can support hub sites and the member sites as well. So again, I'll pause, see if there's any questions or feedback on that so far. No, all right. So again, with Project Cortex, one of the things that's really neat is the ability to have these taxonomy extractors. So the ability as we go through and look at content to actually have the ability to say, well, this is a synonym, and say if we extract something as a piece of metadata, actually map it to something in the term store as a managed term to be able to understand that. Having really great term store reports to get visibility on which terms are being used or not and the composition of the term store. As I mentioned, the ability to push content types out to the hub in their member sites. And then the ability to actually work with new formats in industry standards really around a simple way of having a knowledge and understanding. So really looking at using industry standard term sets, the ability to import term sets that are specific to industries. So I know a few of you work in healthcare, others work in financial services, some work in manufacturing, you work in government. There are a lot of standard terms and term sets that might already be out there. Well, why should you have to rebuild that inside of Office 365? Why can't you import it and import it in an industry standard file format to actually bring those terms in to get a leg up on building your term set as well? So here's a quick peek at the modern admin experience for taxonomy and content types. Again, this has been GA for a little bit. So if you've been in the modern SharePoint Online Admin Center, you'll note that there is the ability to actually see the content types and manage the term store and the content type gallery, and then improving the user experience in modern sites as well. So when a user is trying to search or filter or tag, having a modern view of the term sets that are out there to really make it easier to discover, search, sort, and filter based on these new term sets as well. As I mentioned before, getting better visibility around your term store composition, which terms are open and closed, terms that may not have synonyms. Very similar to the investments we've been making for a while around Microsoft information protection and looking at when labels are being used for security and compliance, whether it's scanning for credit card numbers, social security numbers, or the same way that we're providing intelligence and visibility to things like tags that are being used for retention policies as well, giving that same sort of visibility for the term store. And then, as I mentioned, again, the ability to publish and push these terms out to the hub sites as well, and enforcing them on different document libraries as well. We also announced this back around Microsoft Build, I believe, in the spring. So we have exposed some graph APIs for taxonomy. They are still in preview. I did just validate this morning that they are still in preview. But if you do want to start getting a handle on some of the taxonomy APIs, whether it's things you may want to use as part of an app you're building, or you want to start tagging content a bit as part of a migration process, and you may want to leverage some of the taxonomy and the graph APIs, those are being exposed as well. And again, those are in preview as well. So when you think about the logical architecture of Project Cortex, really it first starts off with end users' knowledge based on the applications they're working in. So having Project Cortex embedded, again, not just in SharePoint and OneDrive, but in Teams and Yammer and Outlook and Office. Having Microsoft Search cut across all of these applications. So if I, as a user, want to search and I go to the search box that's consistent across the nav bar, across all the applications, yes, I'll have the ability to scope to say, just find content within the site or just within my inbox, but give me the ability to scope up at the organizational level. Sometimes I don't remember, was it in a Yammer conversation? Was it an email? Was it on Derek's OneDrive? I really may not remember where that content was. So make it really easy for me to just search and discover content. Now, there's some things that we announced previously as part of Project Cortex that are not part of SharePoint Syntax. So the work we've announced before around topic cards and topic pages and the topic centers, those will be coming later this calendar year. Naomi Moneypenny actually just shared that publicly yesterday as part of the office hours for Project Cortex. But SharePoint Syntax, which is out there today, is really focused around the content center. And again, really focused around those content capture for forms processing and machine teaching. All of Project Cortex is certainly based upon the Microsoft Graph and the artificial intelligence capabilities that we mentioned. And as we mentioned initially, really focused around content that's part of Microsoft 365 that's already been ingested, but over time looking at bringing in additional content through Microsoft Search in the content connectors to enable you to bring in external content from file servers, from MediaWiki, from Salesforce, from ServiceNow, from other non-Microsoft applications as well. So as you think about the graph and the graph connectors, again, we talked a lot about the things that are natively in the service, but as I mentioned, there are already a number of pre-built Microsoft connectors, but there are over 130 different connectors that are publicly available through partners. So some of the folks that we've been working with for years, like BA Insight and Raytheon and others, have already built a whole gallery of connectors. And those connectors are great because they help with not only cracking open these different applications like Documentum and Salesforce and others, but they understand the access control list. They understand how to security trim those sources. They understand how to read the different file types and deal with differential kind of crawling as content's changing as well, and incremental crawling. So a lot of partners have spent a lot of time building a really robust gallery of connectors, but certainly you could build your own custom connector if you had your own custom line of business system or application as well, and you want to feed that information into the graph, and then Project Cortex and Microsoft Search really become customers, if you would, of the information we're bringing into the graph as well. So as you mentioned before, SharePoint Syntax and Project Cortex builds into and feeds into the foundation we've established before around compliance and compliance integration. So having the ability to leverage information to drive a retention label, to talk about how long does a document stick around before it gets aged out. So as an example, I might have one policy that says, documents that are tagged and classified as being HR documents maybe have a 5-year retention policy. But other documents that are tagged and classified based on it being a legal contract or a statement of work, maybe we keep those for 7 days. Maybe the trigger is based on when it was last modified or when it was created or some other disposition date that goes through for review. Having the ability also to drive sensitivity labels such as data loss prevention. So as we find content that might have credit card numbers, social security numbers, might be doing an exact data match, might be doing things where it's looking for again, pattern matching and custom regular expressions that you're building to set and drive sensitivity labels. And based on that label, we could drive encryption, maybe block external sharing with guest users, maybe drive a conditional access policy or a limited access policy that says, hey, you know what, the document you're accessing, the team you're accessing, it has sensitive content. So we're not going to let you access it from your personal device. But if your personal device is being managed, then maybe we do give you access. Maybe we give you limited access where you can't download, you can't sync, you can't take the content offline because we may not trust fully the device that you're on because we won't be worried about data exfiltration. Certainly users can label content interactively as they've been able to do in the past, but labels can also be applied automatically based on the models we're going to build. And then based on that, we can look at analytics and then drive file plans to really scale the application and the visibility around labels that are being used, both for sensitivity and security reasons, as well as for compliance, data governance, and retention policies as well. So Microsoft 365 compliance, as folks probably know, starts off with Microsoft Information Protection, which has been the unification over the past few years of the data loss prevention engine that has been in Exchange and SharePoint and Teams, unifying that what used to be Azure Information Protection for things like labeling of content and encrypting content with rights management, but also integration with our Cloud App Security Broker and even our endpoint protection for endpoint DLP and endpoint scanning. So really thinking about labeling and discovering content across Office 365, across endpoints, and even managing and protecting content in third-party services like Box and Dropbox and Salesforce and ServiceNow. Extending information protection not just to Windows endpoints, but also to iOS endpoints and Android endpoints and others. And having the ability to actually label things like Power BI reports and dashboards and enforce policy inside of Microsoft Edge as well. Certainly leveraging built-in Microsoft encryption keys, but also providing customer the ability to control their keys as well. So if they needed to have a key to protect super sensitive content, whether it's for regulatory reasons or it's a secret recipe for Coke or something that's really, really important to you that you want to make sure that no one else can access it and you don't even want it to be scanned, you don't want it part of search, so having the ability for customers to manage their keys as well with this double key encryption. And the ability to certainly apply information governance, advanced e-discovery, and even advanced auditing to give you the ability to retain audit logs for up to a year for your admin events to look at changes being made as well as activity being done by your admins and your end users as well. So we think that, again, having this content being there and some of the results from having improved precision and consistency around tagging, we really think there's a lot of benefits in terms of certainly a consistent set of metadata, taxonomy, and enterprise content types, the ability to leverage Microsoft Information Protection for setting sensitivity and retention labels, that ability to seamlessly tag and make contextual recommendations, as well as thorough content understanding, and then feeding that into search for discovery, business process automation, and overall governance around, again, compliance and retention policies as well. So before I get into a couple of screenshots and walk through again, wanted to kind of pause. I know it's been a bit of a quiet group. Any questions, any feedback? Have any of you actually started playing around with SharePoint Syntax today since it went GA? We kind of love any questions or feedback you have so far.
So Chris, how do you get SharePoint Syntax? It sounded like in listening to the talks last week that it was a separate add-on to your license.
It is, yeah. I'm going to cover the licensing at the end.
Have you done all of your pinnacles this week?
I'm sorry? I thought there was a question there. Yeah, so SharePoint Syntax is an add-on to, I think it's Microsoft 365 E3 or E5. I have a slide at the end, but it is something that is an add-on that the license SKU just became available today in the admin portals for people to leverage. And it's really because you think about the amount of capacity that we need on the back end in terms of Azure Compute and Storage, Power Platform AI Builder, and other things that Project Cortex is built on top of. It's not just leveraging things that are already part of SharePoint. It's really a net new set of capabilities which require additional compute and storage as well. So I'll get into the licensing in a little bit, but it's a great question, Deb. Other questions? No? Okay.
Actually, I got one more. So
Sure.
it seems to me that we're going to have some sort of a strategy of how to migrate libraries that we have already set up with local, list metadata rather than term store metadata. I think we're going to need some advice and some help and how to migrate that. I know myself and my tenant, when we set things up, a lot of things were still site collection limited and things weren't global yet. So that's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, I know there'll definitely continue to be some more kind of guidance and recommendations, but both based on leveraging content types and leveraging the managed metadata service, but also as you start to think about some of the mapping of these machine generated kind of tags, there'll definitely be some more documentation over time as the product continues to kind of roll out. Cool. All right. So as you think about content processing, this is a view of the content center. So again, this is a new site template that's available with SharePoint Syntax. This, again, is something that an admin would create to create the actual content center. When you create the content center, you can understand the different types of models that are created, and you can understand the confidence level of how confident are we that we've had enough information to train the model to successfully go ahead and tag additional content, how many different things have been processed successfully, what has not been processed yet, and the ability to certainly bring in additional files. Again, I'm going to go through screenshots right now. We're actually in the process of building out some demos at the MTC, the Technology Center where I work. But again, since it just went in GA today, we haven't quite lit up the new SKUs in our demo tenants yet either. But again, over the next couple of weeks, I'm hoping to actually light some of this up and then bring in the Fujitsu scanner. So I'm going to go through some screenshots just for today, but I think you kind of get the gist of things. So the idea is we have this content center. Content will then be ingested into the content center. That could be us just dragging and dropping or uploading content into the document library. It could be, again, us leveraging a workflow. It could be us leveraging a scanner, again, like a Fujitsu scanner. Once the content gets in there, the models that are attached to the library will actually go through and actually look at it, and you can actually start to understand and pull out different attributes, understand some of the notes, and then try to identify the different file types that are there. Once that content's been loaded into the content center, we can then go through and start to build some of these classifiers and build some of these models. So again, Jim, this probably looks very familiar to you for some things that you're used to and inside of Azure, being a developer, building things inside of Lewis and other things. But basically the idea is we want to enable a non-developer or necessarily a non-data scientist to go ahead and say, look, I want to build a new entity extractor. So you can see we have a few here already, like a contract consultant, a contract type. You can see the accuracy, when it was last trained, any comments that are there, any classifiers that are already built. As we go in, basically we'll take the documents and we'll go through and we'll start to train it and say, okay, this word services as an example is something we want to highlight. And you notice that we're building out basically strings that we're using to basically use as terms, very similar to in the past. If you think about how FAST has worked in the past, where we're trying to extract things to do entity extraction. So we're building kind of a phrase list that's here. We're building in documents that we're using to train the model. And as we go through that, we actually look at it and we say, look, well, here's an agreement. Here's the phrase, and we can certainly use operators like ands and ors and near and other things. We can also say if it's going to be case sensitive or not. So again, we're building in information to tell us that, yeah, we're looking for the word agreement. And in this case, it is case sensitive. So whenever we find something with agreements in all uppercase, but again, as I mentioned, we can use proximity keywords. This word that's near this other word or within so many characters of something else. Again, or ands or ors or other Boolean operators as part of building these models. Once we do that, we build that, we can then go ahead and further train the model. Once the model exists, we can then go ahead and point it at existing document libraries. So in this case, we've built a central library of these models and these classifiers, and now we're going to go ahead and point it at another site. So in this case, we're pointing at this prime site. Once we do that, then we can go ahead and upload a set of documents. So in this case, we're going to bring in a bunch of documents. And then a human can go through and actually look at the documents, you can see we're trying to identify and extract some of the metadata, such as the company, the value, the contract type, the contract services. But as you do that, you can actually then look at the different metadata that was identified. And again, if you needed to, you can go ahead and edit it. But again, you can also give feedback back into the model to say, again, this is a positive example, this is a negative example. Again, just like my kids, you can keep doing that machine teaching, that reinforcement learning to continue to make the model better and smarter over time. As you continue to add more samples, it just keeps getting smarter and smarter and enriched as you keep adding more content and keep giving it feedback on, did it get it right, did it get it wrong? And that really helps to drive the confidence within the model as well. So I'll kind of pause on that example before I go into forms processing. Questions on that? Kind of make sense? All right. So forms processing, I think, is in my eyes, a little bit more straightforward and something that I've been doing for a number of months now with AI Builder. AI Builder, as folks probably know, is part of the Power Platform. And AI Builder is a great tool, but the challenge historically with me using AI Builder is the content has to live somewhere. So by taking the step of wiring AI Builder directly into SharePoint document libraries, it limits some of the work that it takes to actually wire these things up. So the way that this works is when I'm in a document library, in this case, I'm on the finance site, and I have a document library for purchase orders. AI Builder actually shows up as a ribbon command. I think the final UI was a little bit different than the mockup. I think it shows Power Platform, then in a Power Platform, you might see Power Automate, then AI Builder as another node on that menu. But when you drill into AI Builder, if you have the right rights, you'll be able to go ahead and create a model. When you create a model, it then launches you into the AI Builder interface where you give it a name, and it says, all right, give us 5 or more documents that have the same layout. When you do that, you then go ahead and you can, again, kind of train the model. It will try to auto-detect what it thinks are items you may want to promote. So in this case, it says that, well, this looks like a date, this looks like a purchase order, this looks like a phone number, a total amount, etc. You can also go in and draw a box basically around things and add your own fields if it did not auto-detect it. But you can also say, look, the model, the tool thinks that it's about 66% confident this actually is a vendor. And you can go ahead and confirm that it is or not. You can go ahead and say, you know what, that isn't something I want to use and kind of ignore the recommendation. But again, as I mentioned, you can go ahead and add other fields like a date field, and you can map to other additional items, like maybe you wanted to bring in the tax amount or the shipping insurance, et cetera, things that might not have been found initially by the model. And again, you can choose to maybe not promote certain fields into the document library as attributes and columns as part of the document library as well. Once that's there, we can go ahead and upload the PDFs, upload the documents into the library, and then it's going to go ahead and process those documents, and it's going to promote the fields from the document and actually promote them into columns. That again, once those columns are there and that metadata has been extracted, we can then go ahead and kick off a workflow. Maybe the workflow is looking at things based on the date, it's looking at things based on the total amount, and maybe there's different workflows based on different thresholds, different dollar amounts, et cetera. And we can actually, again, drive some business process based on the metadata that's been extracted from the documents as well. And of course, you can go ahead then and modify the attributes, modify the metadata based on your own understanding or any corrections that you want to make if something did not get processed right when it was brought into the platform. So here's what Deb was mentioning. So again, it became generally available today for SharePoint Syntax. It is an add-on to the Microsoft 365 E3 or E5 plans. It is priced per user. And yesterday on the office hours, Chris McNulty and the team did confirm that anyone that uses SharePoint Syntax, whether they're a person that's creating the model or someone that's getting the benefit by using it, does require a license. So it's not just the people that are using Syntax to actually create the models that has to be licensed. It's anyone that's using the model. It does include up to 1 million AI Builder monthly credits for form processing, but you do have to have a minimum of 300 users licensed to go ahead and get those credits. And it also gives you 500 indexed items for the content connectors per user. So if you're bringing in content that's coming from external sources, but those items are pooled at the tenant level based on the number of users that you license. So pretty similar to how storage limits are pooled for SharePoint. where you license the company, you get a certain amount of kind of base credits, and then for every licensed user, you get a certain additional amount that's allocated, but it's pooled at the tenant level. So if I don't use all my credits, but Jim needs more, it's basically pulling from a pool at the tenant level. Those indexed items are not being necessarily assigned to a specific user. It's pulled for usage at the tenant level. There's a really great resource center that was created last week on SharePoint Syntax. There's some good overview videos. There's really great points to blog posts from Ignite last week and sessions from Ignite. There's some additional demos, little click-through demos and walkthroughs of SharePoint Syntax if you want to walk through those as well. But those are available to you as well. Questions on this before I go to kind of the roadmap? No, okay. So available soon, as in today, is SharePoint Syntax. So SharePoint Syntax, as we mentioned, is really focused on that document understanding, the content center, the taxonomy services. Coming later this year, as Naomi confirmed yesterday, is the knowledge experience. So that's the new topic experiences, the topic pages, the auto identification of projects and tags inside of conversations, as an example. So inside of Teams and Outlook and SharePoint pages. So in the back of this deck, I actually have a bunch of the screenshots that I used. Actually, Deb, when I did a similar version of the session for the Boston user group a couple of weeks ago, I included those same screenshots at the back. But that is really what's called the knowledge module. The official branding for that and the licensing for that is not final yet. That's not public, so we're just kind of calling that knowledge for now. But the knowledge experience focused around topics and those topic pages and topic centers, that is what's coming later this year. Early next year is additional capabilities in SharePoint Syntax. So expanded usage of models, some more taxonomy seeding, and some richer experiences focused around knowledge. And then things that are going to come later next year and in the future is things like content assembly for think about document assembly for helping to assemble things like contracts or statement of works or office documents, PowerPoint presentations, automated questions and answers. And again, further connection of topics and expertise and metadata across the entire platform. And then over time in the future, enriching things with external systems through Microsoft Search and the Graph as well. Questions on that? All right. So really, getting started and getting ready for Cortex and Syntax. Again, it's really focused around content in Microsoft 365. So continue to get your content ingested into SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams. Take advantage of the SharePoint migration tool. If you have things that are on your file servers on premises, SharePoint on premises. If you have content in third-party content services like Box and Dropbox and Google Drive, Mover, who's a company that Microsoft acquired a while back. I think last year at Ignite, we announced that acquisition, focused on migrating content from third-party content services. Certainly custom scripts and tools, third-party tools that are out there in the marketplace. But really, the more content you get ingested into Microsoft 365, the richer the experience is going to be. Continue to map those known sources, get them mapped into search, get to modern SharePoint pages. And Deb, as you were talking before, really revisiting, revising, revamping, updating your taxonomy, revisiting things that are in the term store, the managed metadata service, really, getting your information architecture kind of in good shape will help. It really helps to kind of boost the machine, boost the AI by having some of the humans doing some of that teaching to kind of give the AI a nudge as well. So if you missed any of the Ignite sessions, there are a bunch of them. Really encourage you to check out the sessions on demand. I know it's tough, as folks mentioned, to sit for 48 hours virtually and watch a bunch of sessions, and we get distracted. I think Derek was saying earlier that you may not block your time, so you get customer meetings, you get internal meetings, other things. You get things with your friends and family that come up. Good thing is all the content was recorded. It's all freely available. Most of the sessions are in kind of 30-minute chunks, kind of bite-sized chunks. So certainly, watch Jeff Teeper's keynote, the session that Chris and Naomi did. They did an Ask the Experts panel, sessions on information lifecycle management. But then there are 30 or so deeper dive sessions. There was a virtual hub focused on knowledge management that was created out on the Learning Center. So when you go out here, you'll actually see a whole bunch of sessions, high-level sessions like Jeff's session and Naomi and Chris's, but deeper dive sessions with folks like Sean Squires and CJ Tan and others on the engineering team. So some really good deep dive sessions, around 30 sessions focused on Project Cortex, SharePoint Syntax, Microsoft Search, Microsoft Graph, other components that are part of this project in this platform. Again, if you want to watch it, there is the SharePoint Syntax announcement from last week, the main landing pages we talked about. There's a quick little video. It's like a little 2-minute kind of marketing video on SharePoint Syntax that you can watch. A really high level, kind of visional, kind of aspirational video. And then, as I mentioned, there are a number of self-paced kind of click-through demos that if you want to get kind of hands-on with SharePoint Syntax before you get the licenses in your tenant and you want to kind of try it out and kind of walk through some of the screenshots and demos, similar to what I just walked you through. They've done a really good job of putting out kind of those demo mate kind of demos for you to kind of walk through and click through some of the demos at your own pace as well. So as I mentioned, Chris McNulty runs regular office hours for Project Cortex. They tend to run monthly. The last one was done actually yesterday. Most of the slides that I have today I actually got from Chris and Naomi just to make sure I had the latest and greatest stuff. Again, over time, I'll be building some more of my own unique content as I get more hands-on experience and work with customers. Given the product is literally brand new today, there's not a lot of other content and examples that are out there. So want to just kind of make sure I'm kind of staying on message with engineering, but really my focus over the next few months at the MTC is doing more and more with customers, design sessions, hackathons, workshops, doing more and kind of building out demos and experiences. And again, over time, I'll be building some more of my own kind of unique content in blogs and other things, just based on my experience getting more hands-on with customers and partners, building solutions based on Cortex and Syntax. So the next office hours will be in October, focused on industry. I think financial services is the first industry. But again, they can plan to continue to run these office hours every month. And again, they're free to watch, free to attend, and they make them available on demand. So the session's going back to March with deeper dive things around administration and governance and information classification, a whole bunch of other things that you can check out as well. So with that, I'm right around time. I think I've got 5 or 6 minutes or so. I wanted to try to get you all done around 7:30 because I know Jim, I think it sounds like you've got your code review coming up at 9, and certainly I know folks have other commitments and things you want to check on at home, but wanted to make sure we spend at least a few minutes. If you had additional questions, feel free to ask them now. You can certainly connect with me on Twitter. And as I mentioned, I do have a blog, and starting tomorrow, I'm planning to kind of reinvest some time in a blog post series, really focused around 5 emerging trends that I'm seeing. I did a session on this, a lightning talk at the Microsoft 365 virtual user group with Joel Olson and Christian Buckley. And really those trends for me have been really Teams as a platform, the Power Platform, Project Cortex, security and compliance, and then industry-based solutions. So doing more and more focus on healthcare, financial services, retail, manufacturing. So really building use cases and scenarios that are really specific to industries and domains are kind of the 5 key trends that I'm spending more and more of my time on. So I'll be doing a lot more blogging really focused around those trends, and more importantly, hopefully some insights that can help you, your customers, your companies, as you continue to go deeper on leveraging Microsoft 365. So with that, I'll take a breath, I'll pause. Really want to thank you all for joining. Again, thank Jim and Derek for inviting me to join you, and happy to take some questions in the last few minutes.
Great, thank you, Chris. I'll give other people a chance to pipe up if there's anything. Say my favorite thing about this is seeing the evolution of the idea of. I remember years ago people starting to talk about file systems, classic file stores as evolving into databases, and I remember thinking that SharePoint was going a long way toward that with the sort of conflation of OneDrive and that sort of thing. It's really cool to see that becoming sort of an enterprise pavement that now that we've actually got that database that all of these content stores have in common, now we can really start building out the applications on top of them and applying AI in this kind of fashion. It's really cool stuff. So.
Yeah, and it's great to see the SharePoint brand, getting a boost again with the product, including SharePoint in the name as well, and SharePoint not just being the content services layer, but actually having some new experiences, right, for folks like you and I and Deb and others that have been in the space for 20 years, to continue to see the investment in not just the platform, but also SharePoint as a brand and in the community, which has been great.
Absolutely.
Deb, looks like you came off mute. Did you have a question or a comment?
No, I was just ready to contribute if the moment arose.
Go for it. Yeah.
One of the big things that I'm going to see that I'm going to have a use case for is a journal repository. Biotechs, pharmas, they consume a lot of journal articles, and one of the first things, in fact, it was my job interview for my current gig, was I need a journal repository so that regulatory could go find all the journal articles that the scientists had actually used to develop the techniques, the drugs, whatever that they're working on. And this is gonna be huge for me, because we set one up and we had somebody manually putting in metadata, and we got maybe 1/10 of the journal articles done. So this is going to be huge for us.
That's great. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. What about other folks? I know Andrea, Joseph, or Laura, Robert, any questions or feedback? Are you folks still with us? Did I put you to sleep?
No, still here. Very interesting. Thank you. And I look forward to having more of our stuff in Office 365 so we can dig in. Thank you very much for this.
Good stuff, Chris. This is
great.
Andre. Good stuff.
Thanks. Yeah. I know, Laura, I think you mentioned at the outset that you were still on premises in the middle of getting content there, and hopefully this gives you a little extra, not so much incentive, but kind of business justification to hopefully get some sponsorship to accelerate the move. Again, not just for SharePoint Syntax, but it sounds like you're getting into Teams and other things in the service, which is great.
Yes, there's lots of good use cases for this at work. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah.
Hey, Chris, I got a question. This is Andre Polito.
Sure.
So Syntax has a free trial. So I tried signing up, but I don't have a domain name. Is there any way around that?
So you're using a tenant that you're just using the onmicrosoft.com account, and it's requiring you to have a domain validated?
Correct.
Interesting. I did not know it had that requirement. I don't know. Literally, this is the first day it's been on, so I'm surprised.
It's today, so.
Yeah, no, I'm surprised that it has a requirement to have a validated domain, because a lot of times when I work with customers, we do hands-on labs and workshops, we often will spin up a free trial just to kind of have a sandbox to play in as like a dev tenant. And we don't go through the process of registering and validating domains either. So that's a good question. Let me find out, because I don't know the answer to.
Yeah, I'll try again later on tonight to see if my question is correct. So, but I just tried it like about an hour ago, and I'm like, I don't have a domain. So I'd love, like you said, I'd love to play in the sandbox with it. Yeah,
no, I definitely can see it. Like I said, I do a ton of that myself with customers that we run hands-on labs or hackathons. We often don't want to do it in their production environment, so we'll spin up a trial to give us 30 days to play around in a sandbox, and then let it expire when it's done.
Okay, thank you so much.
Sure. Yeah, great question. Yeah, thank you. Joseph or Robert, anything from you? Any questions or feedback?
Not for me.
No, I'm all set.
Is syntax a real word?
Not that I know of. It's funny. A lot of people, including myself, keep wanting to put syntax, and certainly in spell check, I've had to add a new word to the dictionary.
Autocorrect, yeah.
So as far as I know, it is not a real word. It is a Microsoft manufactured word, as far as I know.
It's a word that will not come up in search by itself. So.
It's unique, right? It's unique.
Yes, yeah.
Which I'm sure there's some good marketing and or legal reasons why you don't want to get the was it the SkyDrive problem we had before, and then the data flex problem, right, where you're using a word that is used by someone else already.
Yep.
So yeah, as far as I know, it's a made up word.
All right. Anything else? I really appreciate you coming and chatting with us about this. This is awesome stuff. I can think of a million different applications for this that people have been looking for years. So it's really exciting stuff to see it come along and be accessible and available like this. So looking forward to start, running into it in the wild and taking advantage of it in other capabilities and that sort of thing, seeing where it goes from there. So
Awesome. Well, thanks again. I appreciate the invitation. It's good to see you all. Next
Hey,
time, hopefully in person with pizza, right?
that'd be awesome. Looking forward to it. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, but thanks again here. Hold on.
Sure.
Good stuff.